All right, so I wanted to go over the test review with you. The first one, for square root functions, the domain and range are restricted to the normal one, positive x values, positive y values. And one of the things that can change the domain and range are the values of C and D. D is on the outside, they change the range. C is on the inside, they change the domain. So be careful right here. That D that I'm using to point to that is talking about that 5 is the value of C and it changes the domain. So also remember that if you see a +5, we know that it shifts left. So if it shifts left, then the domain is going to be all the numbers greater than or equal to -5. So that's why it maps to that one. This one shifts right, so that means the domain is going to be all the numbers greater than or equal to 5. If it only shifts left and right, then only the domain is going to change. If it only shifts up and down, then it'll only be the range that changes. So that should just be a real quick look and know. You should not have to graph it. You will be allowed to use Desmos on the graphic on the test. The test is going to be on Quizzes. The parent cube root function looks like this. You have to recognize that vertically stretched by a factor of 2 means that the a value is 2. Shifting down, that's a d value, and you just have to know where the a and the d go. Horizontal compression, that's a b, and remember it's B is backwards. So if it's compression by a factor of 1/2, then flip that 1/2 upside down and that's your B value. Vertical reflection over the x-axis, that is vertical reflection is A. A and D are vertical, B and C are horizontal. So vertical reflection, that means A is a -1. So I put the negative out in front. I put the 2 underneath. Horizontal translation, horizontal, that's a C value. It went left 3, so my C value is -3, but when you look down here, you see a +3. Shift up, that's a D value. That should be old news. So I'm looking here, I'm looking at several things. The first thing I noticed that it is a cube root function. Then I look for where that middle number is right there. That is at 3, -5. So those are my C and D values. Then I look to see if it's been stretched or shrunk. And I did over 1 up 1, over 1 down 1. That means that both my A and B are values of 1. So that's how I know that it only translated. So it went right 3, so I'm going to put x -3, and it went down 5. Here I notice that it is a square root function. And instead of going up and to the right, it's now going down and to the left. So that means both A and B are negative. I've reflected it twice. I reflected it vertically. That made it go down, and then I reflected it to the left. That made the B value be negative. Find the endpoint. Those are your values of C and D. Check to see if it's been shrunk or stretched or shrunk. So I do go over 1 down 1 or over 1 down 1 this way. It doesn't matter. That has not, so there's no vertical stretches or shrinks. So all I have to do is reflect it 2 times, shift it to the right 3, so I put x -3, and then shift it up. You could distribute that negative and rewrite that as 3 minus x underneath the square root. That would be totally acceptable, and you should be able to recognize that. So if this was a multiple choice question and this problem right here did not appear, but instead I put 3 minus x, you should recognize that as distributing that negative. Now this one, I do the over 1 up 1 check, and I see that it's not over 1 up 1, so that means it has been either stretched or compressed. This one's over 1 only up 1/2, so that means that my A value is 1/2. It could also mean a B value. B is harder to figure out, but B would only work as well. You just have to, A is easier, so I always do A. Now, I can tell that this has been reflected, but I cannot tell if it was reflected horizontally, shifted left to right, or reflected left to right, or if it reflected vertically. So I don't know if it's a negative A or a negative B, which is why I wrote two different equations. Either one of those would give you the same graph. So it's either a negative A or a negative B. It's not both. I found that middle point right there was at 3, 4, so that's shifting it left, I'm sorry, to the right 3 and up 4. So this shows to the right 3 and up 4. This one I have the negative A value. This one I distributed the negative and got the negative B value. Here solving it, so I did -1 divided by 3, that's where I got the 27. Get of the cubed, so I raise it to the 1/3 power, or take the cube root, however you want to do that. Those two cancel out. Add 5 divided by 2, that's where I get 4, plug 4 in and check it. -15 from both sides, that's where I got -6. Square both sides, remember -6 squared is a positive 36. Divide both sides by 4, plug it back in and check it. And 9 times 4 is 36, the square root of 36 is 6. 6 plus 15 does not equal 9. So this one, the x equals 9 is an extraneous solution, so my actual answer would be no solution. Cube both sides, and 2 cubed is 8. Add 4, divide by 2, that's where I get 6. Plug 6 in and it checks. Find the inverse, rewrite it with the y, switch the x and y. I did all of that in one step. And then solve for y. So add 3, divide by 2, and then raise it to the 1/2 power. So I did all of that, and then get the y by itself, -10. Again, rewrite it with a y, switch the x and y. So I did all that in one step. Then I add 5, then take the cubit, and then add 4, divide by 2. Add 4, divide by 2. Which function has an inverse that's not a function? Remember, quadratic is the shape of a parabola, is like the shape of a U. So if we reflect it, it's a sideways U. A sideways U is not a function. So it has an inverse, but the inverse is not a function. So that's part A. And it also means, this is the same question, which one is not one-to-one? One-to-one means that its the function and its inverse are both functions. So if we have an inverse that's not a function, then that means it's not one-to-one. Which one has a compression? Remember when B is backwards, so you see the fraction, you want to think compression, but it's not. This is a stretch by a factor of 5. This one is a B. We know it's a B because it's inside. We see a number, we think it's a stretch, but it's actually a compression by a factor of 1/2. So which one has a compression? That's this one. Inverses, you switch the x and y. So this is the x value, 2 is the x value, 5 is the y value. Switch the x and y and make 5 become the x value and 2 become the y value, and use the function inverse notation. This one right here, I did have to simplify it a little bit. So I excuse me, I rearranged. I put the x first, and then I factored out the -2. The A and the D changed the y values, so that's why it's 5 times y plus 1. The B and the C changed the x values, but remember B is backwards, so you see a -2. It's still going to be a negative, but you're going to flip it upside down because B is backwards, so it actually is a 1/2. And then don't forget, if you see a -3, you know it's a +3. So that's why we do x is times -1/2 plus 3. And then these, I just put these on Desmos and did the regression. And I think I've already closed it, or otherwise I would show you. But you should just be able to enter these things and do y1, wavy line a x raised to the b, and it'll tell you whether b is a 0.3 or whether b is 1/2.